Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We are finally live. This will be our live broadcast where we will be introducing our esteemed guests, our panels around our very much needed and hopefully a fruitful discussion around domestic violence. So hopefully before I can jump on to the questions, I will give a little bit of an introduction, a brief introduction of our panel. We will start off with Sister Nada. Mashallah, Sister Nada Ibrahim is a PhD in criminology. She also has completed her master's in guidance and counseling. She's a researcher and senior lecturer at University of South Australia. And she has also recently been acknowledged and won the Women Acknowledgement Award. So she's got a lot going on her plate. The next esteemed guest I'd like to introduce is Sister Summayyath. She is the CEO of ComExtra and ComExtra Knowledge Concepts and Due Counseling. She is a counselor, psychotherapist, life coach, couple and family counseling, creative consultant, and the list goes on. So we've got, mashallah, two amazing women who are now going to impart their knowledge onto us. And hopefully we can have just some really important questions answered in context of the Muslim community. I will also, hopefully, Brother Ismail Davids will also be joining us. He is the CEO of National Zakat Foundation, or Brother Munir Abdullah. He is the national manager of National Zakat Foundation, depending on their connections. So hopefully we will jump straight into the questions. Before we start, how are you doing, both Sister Nada and Sister Summayyath?
Alhamdulillah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And I think I'm just going to start straight up with the questions. So, Sister Nada, I think I will start off with you. I'm going to use the exact question so that it's easier for us to share at the bottom. So what is the definition of domestic violence? And how does that exactly manifest, do you think, in a marriage or in a relationship?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome everyone to those who are listening in the different platforms. So just when we're looking at the issue of domestic violence or family violence, if you go, I just wanted to just flag a thing that every state uses a different terminology. So for example, Victoria uses the word family violence. If you go to Queensland, they use the word domestic violence. If you go to South Australia, it's domestic and family violence, and so on and so forth. And every state has got its own legislation. So I'm going to explain to you a definition from the Victorian Family Violence Act 2008. So how is it defined? Family violence is defined as a behavior by a person towards a family member of that person. If the behavior is physically, sexually abusive, emotionally, psychologically abusive, economically abusive, threatening, coercive, or any other way of controlling or dominating a family member, and causes that family member to feel a fear for the safety or well-being of themselves or another person that's under their care. It is also behavior of a person that causes a child to hear or witness or otherwise be exposed to the effects of behaviors that I've explained before. So if I want to just very quickly show some, like highlight or flag some of the patterns of behavior, it's an ongoing pattern of behavior. So it's not just like one incident, there's an ongoing pattern of behavior. It's repeated and it can be different forms of, like I've got something where it can be physical, sexual, verbal, financial, emotional, spiritual, psychological, social. So there's so many different categories on how you would define domestic and family violence.
It does sound very complex. And maybe to a person who might be experiencing domestic violence, particularly a Muslim person, they would be like, oh, I just have a few issues. Maybe it's not that. Maybe my issue is not that, what you're talking about. So can you highlight two things can you maybe elaborate on what do you mean by how can it manifest within a marriage? And also you mentioned, I'll let you touch a little bit more about spiritual violence, because that's something that we don't understand. What does the person, do magic on the person? What do you mean by spiritual violence? What is that?
Yeah. Okay. In terms of how it manifests, coming back to this thing, just remind me about the spiritual stuff in case I forget. But when you're looking at how do you identify, how does it manifest in a relationship? So you have those different forms of violence that I spoke about. So it could be like some severe acts, it could be some of the minor acts. So if I wanted to explain physical assault, for example, or physical abuse in a relationship, the things that could be considered as being some of the less severe is things like throwing an object at someone, twisting the arm or hair, pushing or shoving someone, grabbing and slapping a partner or a family member. In terms of the more severe stuff, could be like using a weapon, like a knife or a gun or whatever, punching or hitting a person with something, choking, slamming against a wall, beating up, burning or skull, or some kind of a torture, kicking. All of these are some of the ways that it manifests, in a physical way. If there's physical abuse in a relationship, you know that there is psychological abuse happening as well, because physical
Okay.
abuse is unfortunately the only one that's recognized. Like most people who recognize if it is physical, they don't recognize it when there is psychological, emotional. So within the psychological, for example, you may find things like, let me just read that out. It'd be things like, say, insulting or swearing. These are some of the less severe ones. Shouting or yelling at your partner or a family member, stomping out, doing something to spite, doing something like some harm to someone's pet, someone's property, destroying their property, calling them fat or ugly, accusing them of being a lousy lover, for example, threatening to hit or throw something at them. All of these kind of behaviors. So there's this emotional thing that chips out at the self-esteem. So
Mm.
sometimes you find that there are women who are so highly educated, like judges, for example, in those kind of public roles, but they could be subjected to domestic violence at the home because the person has over time has made them feel so less about themselves that they have believed what the person has said. So you sometimes find these stunning women who are in relationships that the partner has made them feel really, really, made them feel so the self-esteem has been lowered
Broken.
and has been
Yes. So
broken
broken.
to that
Yeah.
extent that they have forgotten that what Allah has created is Allah's best. Allah says about
Yeah.
human beings is best, He's created them best of creation, and so they have believed someone's other's narrative. They've taken that on as their own identity and have unfortunately obliterated their own identity. Just touching on that thing about spiritual, so within this context of family, you've got, like I said, the financial, that it could be something that the person is not being given their financial independence. So they have to account for every way that they spend their money. They have to account for it with their partner or some family member or whatever. Or they may have that they are being controlled, their movements. They can't go visit their family. They can't visit their friends. This is a social. Or I'll give you an example of one time, this one incident, and this is in the Muslim community. Unfortunately, there was this incident. I just point there that the Rasul Salam has said that any kind of social problem that exists in other societies will also exist in Muslim community. So we are
Because we're
not free
human
of
beings.
domestic violence.
Yeah, we're human beings.
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah.
It's a human problem. So just this example of this how social abuse was manifested in this relationship. The woman who had come, she was from a refugee background. She had just migrated to Australia. And what the husband, the way how he was controlling her, he would not allow her access to learning the English language. He would not allow her to get out of the house. So before he'd leave the house, like, you know how you've got the security door? He would put like a piece of paper in between the door and when he comes to close it. So when he comes home, if the piece of paper is on the ground, he knows she's been out of the house. She's opened the door and gotten out. So unfortunately, then she'd be subjected to physical abuse in the house. So just these different forms of abuse that exist, psychological and so on. In the spiritual perspective, there are things like people doing, like, unfortunately, sihr or hasad or these kind of things, which is envy and so on. Also, not allowing the woman to wear her scarf, forcing her to remove her scarf if she is, say,
Mm.
wearing a scarf, particularly in these relationships when you have a relationship. Say, for example, if the husband is a Muslim perpetrator but the woman is from a non-Muslim background, and she's, not allowing her to practice her faith in a relationship where where the person is a Muslim, not allowing them to practice their faith, not allowing them to teach their kids religion. These are all manifestation of spiritual abuse. you know, or any form of things that is attached to the religion, that becomes where, you know, they can't openly, safely practice something. That would be considered as
So,
being spiritual abuse.
so could we also consider spiritual abuse in cases that I've known people and clients where they wanted to, maybe they came from overseas and they were wearing hijab, but when they came here, they wanted to continue forward, but they were being forced to do, full face covering. They were not allowed to talk to other people as that was more religious. Whereas she felt very isolated because she felt she could make friends, she couldn't talk to people. So would that qualify as spiritual abuse as well, forcing someone to do something that maybe they didn't
That
say
they
they
don't
want?
want to do. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's about, at the end of the day, when you are taking away someone's power, you're taking away their right as a human being that Allah has given them, their entity. Any kind of behaviors that consistently does it, that erodes their self, their identity,
Mm.
with, you know, that becomes something that it would fall under that category. So if someone is, say, for example, not ready, like at the end of the day, religion is something, the practice of faith, the is and the observance, to the degree that you observe, is something where you need to submit yourself to it, because Allah is not in need of that from us.
No.
It is for
Mm.
our own personal benefit that we do things, right? So when
Yeah.
we follow our faith, people are in a different, you know, in the journey of
It's
religion,
a
they're in a different
continuum.
point.
Yeah.
So it's
Mm.
that thing, you know, that continuum, exactly. Like I'm not, I would be in a different point to say somebody else that is from my family. So we're all so different in our
Mm.
journey. So at the end
Mm.
of the day, Allah says, La ikrah fi din. There's no compulsion in religion. So when
Mm.
when you want to do something, Allah wants you to do it wholeheartedly.
Mm.
That's why Islam is submission. It's about
Yeah.
submitting ourselves to that. So
Because
yes, so
particularly
certainly.
when we touched on the subject of converts, like some of the clients I spoke with, they were obviously subjected to horrendous psychological abuse, and something that you mentioned before, where he's putting a piece of paper in the door, and as soon as she leaves, she's constantly thinking that I don't want to do anything to make sure that paper is out the door, otherwise she'll get in trouble. So even though she hasn't done anything, it's like you are going mad within your own home. So that sounds
Yeah, yeah,
very torturous for
yeah,
in terms of a psychological abuse. But also
absolutely.
the client that I was speaking of, she also she was a convert and she was forced to do so many things. Unfortunately, when she got out finally, she saved her life. When she got out of the relationship, she decided, I don't enjoy any of this, because she associated everything about hijab and niqab with abuse. So we, rather than doing it in a beautiful way, she ended up leaving thinking abuse, all of abuse is faith. So
Mm.
we need to understand that human beings have their right as well, like you suggested.
Yeah, can I flag something there? I remember there was this case where I was doing a bit of research on Muslim victims' experiences with the criminal justice system as part of a research that I was doing. And I remember one of the women, you know, victim survivors that I was talking to, she mentioned she was a very religious person, you know, to start with. Allah Mabarak, like she was very like in her deen and things like that. But because of the abuse she was going through, she started to associate the beard, which is supposed to be something something that is beautiful and representative of deen and things like that. She started to view it in a very negative way. So that became something that she just didn't want. Every time she saw a man with a beard, it became associated for her with the abuse she was going through. So it was
Yes.
such a sad, you know, thing to see. So there is definitely that
Mm,
thing about how religion is being represented, and particularly
mm,
on these symbolic kind of representations of faith. And so it's
mm,
really, really important that we address these issues.
mm. Um, I think you've flagged the absolute flagged us in the right direction, because I think I'm going to put the next question to Sister Sumaya. If Sister Sumaya can elaborate more, where we're talking about abuse and the consequences of abuse on the target. Let's say the target, if we want to refrain from inaccurate terminology. So, Sister Sumaya, what do you think? What can cause someone to domestically abuse their partner? Like, what can cause a person to just marry someone? You've had a big beautiful marriage, and then all of a sudden you want to turn around and start hurting that person. And does it even impact the target? And how do you think has that comes about? The three questions I've put to you, I apologize.
Yeah, that's all right. We will. What we want to do is to try and get a sense, and hopefully, I'm always about understanding that Allah places and positions us in such a manner that we don't know who is watching, we don't know who's listening, we don't know whose hearts will be touched, just by attending to this live stream. And so we want to try as much as possible to put our intentions forward. May Allah accept it and bless it more than what we hope for, and then make it turn hearts. First of all, I want us to change the language. It's not a target, it's a human being. So that's the first thing. Because one of the things that can continuously enable a person to perpetrate violence is the dehumanization of the person, slowly but surely. And that happens when a person is treated in a particular way for an extended period of time. Even, mashallah, tabarakallah, with all the amazing sharing that Dr. Nada was just doing just then. But one thing that was very important to point out is that at the end of the day, we can try to understand some of the complexities, but I'm always about bringing it back to that core thing. And that's what she said. When you try to take away the right of a person, you try to use power and control, you try to redefine how they see themselves as well as the world because you believe that you have a right to, that is very, very harmful and problematic, to say the least. With regards to what can cause a person to hurt another person, it's very complex. There are many issues. There's psychological issues, there are biological issues. Sometimes there are, not even sometimes, oftentimes, the abuse is perpetuated because the society is conditioned to believe that that's just what happens. So language, like I just pointed out, is a key part of it. The culture, the environment, the enabling of even whether it is a female that is the victim or the perpetrator herself, whether it is in-laws, where a person might say, what did you do to him? Well, why, how come you made him so angry? Or, where parents might say, the day you left the house, I closed the door to your room. You no longer have a place here. And the person is begging to be saved or to be helped. So all these things perpetuate violence. Also, sometimes there are good people. There are good men who will go through different situations in their life, and that then becomes a trigger for behaviors that may already be present there. Maybe something they've seen the male figures in their lives perpetuate. And I talk about women more because I see at times people rush to say, oh, but men get abused as well. And what they do by doing that is that they attempt to put the scale of abuse that women experience on the same scale as men. It's not a competition. We're only talking about it in terms of what the numbers and the research shows, that women are the one that mostly experience exponentially. But then we have men that are abused, but they don't report it. And even if they report it, by virtue of a lot of positions that they're placed in, they tend to have more power and control. Whereas for women, and you'll find that the research shows the correlation between violence and gender as well. So where you have women often are not financially capable, so they stay on in a very abusive relationship where they think, well, how am I going to go without my children? Which can be used as a tool of manipulation and control and abuse as well. So it's very complex. So you have men who may start out, they don't mean any harm, loving relationship, and then they have some risk factors, and they have stress and anxiety. And unfortunately, the person closest to them is the one that experiences it. Oftentimes, though, there are usually flags right at the very beginning of the relationship that are not noticed or are ignored or are dismissed or are minimized or are, named in a certain way to make it all okay. I just wanted to also really quickly, what we're talking about spiritual abuse as well. As a matter of fact, I have worked with quite a number of people who are reverts, and it is just unbelievable the horrific experiences they would have. So the spiritual abuse would often manifest in perhaps the man telling them that if you don't come and attend to me, and this is not just for rivers, it's also a tool of abuse as well. If you don't
Okay.
come and attend
Yeah.
to my needs sexually,
Mm.
Allah will never forgive you. And since you're
Yes.
always trying to
That's
strive
we've
for the
heard
pleasure
that
of
a
God,
lot. Yes.
yeah, so and even I find women, may Allah bless them, amazing human beings who are so scared of Allah's punishment that they'll prefer to continue to take the punishment, the horrific harm that is done to them. So there are many reasons why domestic family violence can occur. Uh,
Mm.
so in order to talk about this, I really like us to be as realistic as possible about these things, because there are a lot of misinformation and misrepresentation of Islam that
Mm.
automatically just gives a pass to emotional abuse, financial abuse. Just really quickly, I remember one person, this was a long time ago, and finally this sister reached out, and she was the only one working for the family, and she was earning money, and every time she earned the money, she was required to give the man the money. And to the point that even when she now would need money for personal hygiene, the man wouldn't give it to her. And I'm just referring to a tiny case, but I'm deliberately referring to this because after a while, the man traced, obviously was tracking her, and then came over and sent a message to me, 3 pages, trying to justify to me all the places written in the Quran and Hadith of Prophet Islam why he had the right to all the things he was doing to her. So, you have many cases like that. You also have people who are leaders and community people who they are just different people in their homes. There are some of the people who perpetrate some of the worst kind of abuse as well. So it is very deliberate, it is intentional. Whereas you have some people who have mental health issues, personality issues, things that haven't been dealt with. They themselves may have been abused. And there's that famous thing of hurt people, hurt people, hurt people. So if you don't attend to the things that are disturbing you, you are going to, the wounds that you have in you, you're going to bleed all over the people around you.
I think you've shared so many nuggets of wisdom here, Sister Sumaya. I wish that I could just screenshot it. But I think the one of the first takes that I have from your input is it seems like most of domestic violence is based around control. Like there seems to be some sort of a control dynamic happening within the relationship, where it's not necessarily they're trying to, like they have any other agenda, but it's more based around trying to control the person that you are trying to target. Would that be accurate to say, Sister Sumaya?
Oh, it's definitely a major reason. But some of what I mentioned before is that sometimes when a person is going through some kind of mental health issue themselves, say, for example, they experience an anxiety, the only way, that's assuming it's the man, the only way he feels like he knows how to control his environment is to control everybody in the environment. So not just the spouse, perhaps the children. You might find that such a man is like a tyrant in his home. He's stressed from work. He's very anxious about not being able to meet his financial commitments. Then he comes home, he's yelling at everybody, screaming at everybody. He's very aggressive. And what can then happen as a result of that is violence, is physical violence. Because in addition to that, he doesn't know how to regulate his emotions. And so he
And
takes it
that's
out
how he
aggressively.
manifests it. Yeah.
Exactly. So in that circumstance, it is control, but it is more of something that he's trying to fight within himself, but is now manifesting by how it is impacting on the people in his life. But there are other people who, I'm always a little bit careful about this idea that, oh, it's a personality disorder. I do believe that at times people use that to use as an excuse and to externalize and not take responsibility for things that they have the capacity to change. And so, because obviously when you say something is a personality disorder, it can immediately assume that, oh, well, he's not well, so you have to excuse it. But
And
yes,
look,
that may be
like,
true. That may be true, but at the end of the day, today, there's a possibility that there might be something still be done depending on what the person is experiencing. It is complex for sure.
I will take on from there where you're talking about when we try to put everything in the under the banner of mental health or like you said, personality disorder, then we can absolve ourselves of the responsibility. And as Muslims, there's something that we are submitting to is we, to the best of our capacity, we want to take a responsibility for our actions, whether we are is receiving abuse, and maybe we could educate ourselves or find ways that how to understand what we're going through, or if we are exacting that abuse, that we take responsibility about our behavior. I'll pass this conversation on to Sister Nada, because I think you had some other input you wanted to offer before we jump to the next question.
Yeah, in terms of the drivers of abuse, thank you for that, Sister Sumaya. You have covered so many different complexities, and that word complexity is so important. That it's such a complex issue. You can't explain domestic violence within the Muslim community or family violence just by power and control, and that's it. There's a research that I did in this area, as well as other research, looked at this issue of what you were talking about, the anxiety, the stress, and so on, the general strain theory, or the theory of we learn. And so that intergenerational transmission, it is so important to interrupt that. When kids are witnessing or experiencing domestic violence or neglect in the family, hand in hand with the domestic abuse that goes to the, the parent or whatever, they are learning these behaviors. They're learning that it's okay to do this. So it's important to interrupt that and to change that and to teach them new ways of doing something, new ways of conflict resolution. If you want something, it's not through hitting or through some form of abuse that you'll get it. There is other ways of doing it. And when you look at, subhanAllah, the Rasul Sallam, you look at his example, he never raised his hand on a woman or a child ever. And one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ, he said in a hadith is, the best of you are the best to their wives and family.
Yes.
He didn't say to your friends.
Yes.
Or to the community. He said your wives and your family. That in itself is just so important. And this idea of holding offenders responsible for the behavior, because one of the theories that I looked at is about we make a rational choice. If a person when we minimize behavior, like how you said, Sister Sumaya, about minimizing the perpetrator's behavior or victim blaming that often happens, you are allowing the community to create an environment where it's saying it's okay to do that when it isn't. It is not okay, because the Rasul in his parting pilgrimage farewell, he said one thing. He said, look after your women.
It's pretty straightforward. Like even when we look at the Sunnah of the Prophet, like when we want role models for our young girls, just the women that surround the Prophet are enough. Hazrat Khadija, Hazrat Aisha, Hazrat Fatima, these women were powerhouses. Even Hazrat Maryam, Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anha, who's mentioned in the Quran, she was a single mother and she raised a Prophet, a noble single mother, but she was someone who's led a way for other women that, look, just because you're experiencing life or you want to submit to Islam doesn't mean that you can forget yourself in the process. And I think I'll ask you, Sister Nada, to elaborate a bit more while we're discussing on women in general, because statistically we understand that women unfortunately are the overwhelming recipients of family violence. How does that even, isn't it just a disagreement? Men have a bit of a temper. Isn't it just a disagreement? How can that even impact a person, a target of abuse? The question would be, yes, does it even impact the target, and how?
Again, this word target, bring it back, it's a human being.
Yeah, the human being
that is being
the abuse.
that is being so and I really like that Sister Sumaya, you flagged that issue, that these are human beings. Dehumanizing the issue makes it easier for you to target someone. But when you say this is a human being and this is a person that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, sometimes it blows me. I'm like, how can someone do that to another human being? There are moments when I go through that and I think to myself, and it overwhelms me, and I'm thinking that, how dare you? How dare you? And why? Why would you do such a thing? And so this idea of people being again, this thing of this transmission, when you are doing something, don't you fear that Allah is watching what you're doing? Don't you fear that you're going to be asked in front of Allah to explain why you did something? You know, going back to your question about this thing about its impacts, the impacts are so much. It's not only on I just pick up a stat that every year 17 million assets are abandoned by women in Australia who are fleeing domestic violence, because all they think about is, I want to be safe. And one of these things that comes over here is this idea that you have to take responsibility as a victim survivor about your safety. You need to put a safety plan in place. You need to know how it's. And when I think about this, I think about, okay, if you had to be forced to go on like a weekend trip and you only have 15 minutes to prep yourself, what are you going to do? So you really need to put a safety plan in place, because this is going to impact on your kids who are witnessing. And often you find research shows that women will take action when they see the impact it's had on their kids. That's like the children witnesses is the biggest trigger for them to take action. So it's about that. And I don't know if I'm addressing the question that you raised. Like, I kind of like got
it was
lost
more
in
around
it.
that. How does it, like, I think I will maybe rephrase the question, because you answered it, but you answered it another angle. So the question was, does it even impact the target, and how? So I think I was, for a person, maybe, how does that change them? Like if the lady has maybe interests, or if she is, living a certain way, after she's experienced abuse consistently, how would that manifest? How would you meet someone, and like if you're meeting a friend and say, oh, you are experiencing domestic abuse, how would you say that?
Often sometimes, like, there are these excusing of behavior of the perpetrator. So for example, say a woman who is a victim survivor, it so happened that she was physically abused, and she's got a bruise. What she will do is she will use makeup to cover that, and say that sometimes it comes through, you can't really cover the whole thing. And so if she's in a workplace and she's being asked about it, isn't like, what happened, or she may flinch in certain ways that she is with someone. She may, if someone touches and there's a bruise somewhere, these are indications. And people who are trained in this area are able to identify that. So if the victim survivor, be it male or female, is going through something like that, and they become so low in their own, they have lost their sense of self, that it becomes such that they think that they start blaming themselves, that maybe I called it on myself. They excuse, so they go, oh, maybe I did this and that's why he did this to me. Maybe I didn't have the food ready. Maybe maybe I'm not a good wife. Maybe I'm not a good mother. Maybe I'm not a good, so they excuse others' behaviors. So it's about stopping that and saying, you know what, I have a right to my own identity, in my own entity, and right to be safe. And so this impact it's not only at that moment, it has repercussions long term. It affects their performance at work. It affects how they are at home. It affects their family relationships. It affects their friends. Sometimes they would end up isolating themselves because they don't want to answer the questions that others are asking them about, hey, are you okay? What's going on? Like, you don't look yourself. Like, you don't, there's something not right about you. There's something off. Because they don't want to answer that, they then start to isolate themselves. And isolation, once you're isolated, you've broken your extended support, whether it be family or friends or community. And that then allows the perpetrator to continue their behavior. So it doesn't only impact on the victim survivor, it also impacts the perpetrator. Because I mean, nobody's born a perpetrator. So it really impacts on that. And it's about also the way of healing this forward is like, how are you going to help not only the victim survivor, but the perpetrator and anyone who's impacted on it? Even the community goes through, the cracks. So how do you fix that? There are different things that you got to do as part of the process of empowerment. And I'll stop there. So this is just where you can.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the conversation, because I ask a question and the answer is so broad. It covers areas that I wanted to touch on, particularly around victim blaming and the responsibility of the community, and these little narratives that we shove into, unfortunately, the woman who's leaving the house when at the time of marriage, that these are the things that you have to accommodate in order to have a happy marriage. at whatever cost. So which Sister Sumaya has also touched on previously before. I think while we're on the subject of community and victim blaming, Sister Sumaya, I'm going to ask you to explain to us this interesting concept of victim blaming. What do you mean exactly by victim blaming? And also, do we have a trend of accommodating domestic violence in our community? And how does that manifest in the Muslim community in particular?
Okay. So how much longer do we have? Because
So we have around
this
15 more
some
minutes.
big.
We have, let's say,
15
you
more
have
minutes.
10 minutes. You have 6 to 10 minutes, because then I'm going to ask Brother Ismail if he's still with us.
All right. So victim blaming is exactly what the word says. When a person who is a victim of some kind of violence or abuse of some sort is held accountable since behavior or for the violence that is done to them. Now, I'm a big one about self-accountability. As a matter of fact, any personal work that you're doing on yourself, any kind of way of being as a Muslim who's constantly striving for excellence as a person who strives for integrity, you must practice accountability right from this world before we are held accountable for in the next. So self-accountability is very important. But you see, in the context of domestic violence, that seems to be the core thing that is done. Where a woman, he said, well, when he called you to bed, didn't you answer him? When you made his food, you know he doesn't like his food cold. Why would you make it cold? Well, why did you go call the cop? You know you're trying to break the family. Why are you even telling your friends? You're trying to shame him. Why are you, he only did it once, and that was because he was angry because somebody angered him at work. So you are always responsible. Sometimes, victims will go make every attempt. They'll do everything, lose weight, change their clothes, learn sexual behavior to satisfy the husband, be as quiet as he wants, or speak out louder just as if nothing satisfies the person. So there's a concept called gaslighting, and that gaslighting is a concept where it's one of the things that actually perpetrated really, really harmfully emotional abuse. And so when you were even asking about some of the effect of it, it's across board. So what tends to happen is that when you blame a person long enough, they will definitely take responsibility for things they're not responsible for. That have, causes anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. Their physical health is impacted. They don't have any confidence to say they're going to hold down jobs. They can't even parent their children properly. And one thing that tends to happen is that even when the victim eventually, and I like how Dr. Nada, how you kept mentioning victim survivor, but it's a stage. Sadly, some people don't survive. They get killed. So, and there's not this idea of, oh, I don't want to be a victim. Don't call me a victim, but you are. You're a victim. When something has been done to you, you're a victim. So in order for a person to even have that capacity, think about living an abusive relationship, which, by the way, I'm told that the research shows that women would attempt to leave an abusive relationship 7 times before they finally leave. That's what the research is showing. She goes and she comes back. She goes and she comes back. And so it's a lot of reasons. And the society, so to take you to the second question, something, I'm not sure exactly how you worded it, to do with the Muslim
trend of
community.
accommodating domestic violence in our community? I think if you could wrap it up quickly.
Yes, we do. Yes, I have to. So just really quickly, one of the ones is the verse of the Quran that is usually quoted and is given as permission for abuse. I know we don't have time to go into that, and I am not a scholar. I can't address that. However, what I do know, and Dr. Nada did mention it, we have the example of the Prophet ﷺ, who was the best example for us. And there's no doubt in our minds that how he lived is enough for us. He never hit the women. He was kind. He called women glass vessels. He was very respectful. There's also two quick things I wanted to mention just before we finish. In the Quran, Allah refers to us that he's created us mates. We're very quick to quote that verse but we miss some of the key words in there. We can't even go into that. The second one is Allah says that He has made us garments. How do you treat your garments in a way that exposes you? How do you take off somebody's garment and leave them out in the sun to the element? It doesn't make sense. So one of the most important things I want us to hear, for every one of us listening, we are all in it together. This idea that this thing can't happen to us in the Muslim community is not true, is erroneous. We're human beings. We experience the same kind of stressors. We experience the same kind of things that happen to other people. This thing of it's a Western thing, it's not true. It is not true. In fact, the shame factor of abuse is one of the things that perpetuates abuse, because then abuse is in silence, is hidden in silence. We're not able to talk about it because of the shame factor. But I don't have time, so I better stop talking. Otherwise, we will
No,
go more off
honestly,
time.
we wish that we had like a 2-hour session, because, like you suggested, like you're just touching the surface, and we need to really go in deeper to understand how that has penetrated the Muslim community. But I think we're already on the right track, and hopefully we can have more sessions in the future. Brother Ismail, are you with us? Can we ask a few questions to you?
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes.
Yes, I'm
Assalamu
with you.
alaikum, brother. Sorry, Brother Ismail, we've been just too busy getting our homework out of the way. So can we, now we're trying to shift more towards solution mode, and what NZF and what we as a Muslim community initiatives are we taking in order to address domestic violence and hopefully healing pathways forward. So can you elaborate a little bit more on initiatives by NZF for domestic violence?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah alameen. In the National Zakah Foundation, so we've worked with Sister Nada and Sister Summayyath in the past on many of these aspects, but we have now reached the point where we realize that if we don't do anything different moving forward, then things will just, in 5 years from now, we will talk about the same statistics, we will talk about the same issues and stuff. And I guess the Australia as a whole, the world as a whole, is grappling with this issue. And I'm not sure, because we're not in that educational space of, are they addressing things in a different way? But National Zakah Foundation, we've embarked on what we call our Healing Forward program. So our Healing Forward program is in relation to domestic violence. And we are trying to do groundbreaking new ways of working with our people like our esteemed guests here. We're also working with some other organizations that are going to try and implement and foster some solutions to this problem. Now, it's not a short-term thing. It's not something that's going to happen in the next 6 months. It's not something I think will take us years, but we need to start. We need to say this is generational change. If we're not going to make generational change, we don't want our children to talk about the same things. Mm-hmm. So unless we as pioneers stand up and say, look, let's look at this from a different aspect. Let's see how we can help ourselves. At least we've tried. So in the National Zakah Foundation, we've launched a few programs, and one of the programs is what we call the Healing Forward program. The Healing Forward program has quite a few components, but we're covering two aspects of it. One is healing forward with muwadda and rahmah. So that is taking from the ayah of marriage, where Allah talks about marriage is and find muwadda and rahmah. So that's comfort and mercy with each other. So one will ask, how is this related to domestic violence? So we've realized that there are couples that are still married, and sometimes either the husband or wife do not even realize that the actions or the behaviors constitutes domestic violence. So we want to establish some actions or some events where we can talk, and these couples can put up their hand, either the wife or the husband, say, look, my husband is doing such and such and such. I don't think he realizes that stopping me from visiting my parents or not giving me any money or not allowing me to talk to anybody is actually a form of domestic violence. Now, a lot of these couples may be happy to stay together, so we need to have some programs in place that will help them stay together and work through that. And then our second component is healing forward with strength and courage. And those are obviously for those who have left the marriage and they need help to rebuild their lives. And the sister mentioned that a lot of the women tend to come out and go back. And I was reading an article, it's lots to do with the fact that they go back is because they've got nowhere else to go. So when they leave, They worry about their finances, they worry about the children, they worry about everything else. They've got nowhere else to go, and then they just go back. So if we don't address that, if we don't look at, okay, how can we help that part of the problem? And then also a third part of our program is what we, and one of the sisters also mentioned about teaching the younger generation what is acceptable and what's not. So we're developing a program called Respectful Relationships. And in that program, we will go into the schools, the madrasas, the Quran schools, and talk about this particular subject in a manner that will allow children to identify or break that cycle in this space. So for NZF, we are very optimistic. It's somebody might say, look, this is very ambitious, but I call it generational change programs, where we want to make a change for the next generation, inshallah. So have a go onto our website. You'll see that we have actually launched all these programs on our website, and you can either become a partner with us on this particular programs. So we have two types of partners. One is a service partner, which is organizations, individuals, and people who will help us deliver and fulfill this program, such as the two esteemed guests we have here. And then we have program partners, any individuals, organizations, businesses who would like to contribute financially for us to implement this program. And currently we have one program partner, which is MCCA, who stepped up and said, look, guys, we think this is fantastic work you are doing. We'll put in some funds for you to do this. We also have some brothers who have given their zakat towards this, and they don't want to mention their names. So my brothers and sisters who are listening to us today, these are generation change programs. We are starting this now, and inshallah, with the will of Allah, we hope to remain steadfast and we will be able to make a change. I don't have the answers. I don't know what are the answers, but we would like to work with the experts in the field and support them and give them all the service they need for us to make this change, inshallah.
Subhanallah, like alhamdulillah, this is such a long time coming, and I love the fact that you are terming this as generational change, because as much as we can do work in helping our targets or people who have experienced abuse forward, but also setting the foundations for our next generation to break that cycle where we can. Can I also quickly ask Brother Ismail, is it if a person is experiencing domestic violence, can she contact National Zakat Foundation? Will National Zakat Foundation be able to help them in some capacity?
Yes, so we've had many cases over the last 7 years, and yes, anybody who's in need of anything, whether it's financial, whether they need to leave the house, whether they need some shelter, whether they need anything, they need help, they need to get to an imam or a sheikh, we can assist with all of those things. And one of the other things we're going to do is try and get the shuyukh and imams and the scholars on board with this. They have to start being involved and talking at the lower level about this. I mean, in the classes, yes, it's fine to talk about how to make wudu, how to form salah, but they need to start addressing these sorts of issues. So that's all part of our program. And yes, anybody who needs help, you can apply straight away now online, and we will be able to help you, inshallah.
Yes, alhamdulillah. And like you said, that because this is such a pivotal matter, it's not just between, and I'm going to ask our panels to discuss this further, it's not just between husband and wife, as what you mentioned, it affects the family. And what one of her biggest concerns is, what am I going to do with the children? How will the children eat? Where will the children sleep? You know, a mother can maybe let go of a lot of her own comforts, but when it comes to the children, she will always, unfortunately, bend her head down and maybe take more abuse for the sake of her children. I will also ask quickly our administration team to run the NZF hotline number. It's 1300 663729. If anybody is feeling that they are experiencing domestic violence, or maybe they just wish to talk and just confirm, even if NZF, they don't want to seek immediate help, they can at least be referred to counselors that they can speak with and hopefully understand the situation they're in. So I'm going to come back to Sister Summayya, and I'm going to ask you briefly to elaborate a little bit more on what a person, I'm going to ask Sister Nada to also jump in, to what, if a person is feeling, if a lady is feeling that she's experiencing domestic abuse at home, what can she do? Because it can be a very isolating experience for the person. So what can she do if she feels that I think I am being exposed to domestic violence?
Okay, well, the most important is to be safe. So sometimes, when a person shares with a companion or a friend, they say, "Why are you still there? Go straight away." And the research shows, and from working with people, that that's one of the most dangerous times for a woman who is in an abusive relationship. So
What
be
is the most
safe.
dangerous
So
time?
being
Can you
safe is the
explain that?
priority. Sorry, the most time is trying to leave the relationship without having, and Dr. Nada said something earlier, without having to try to have some kind of structure or plan that can almost always keep you safe. Safety is a key thing, because what tends to happen a lot is that the minute an abuser recognizes or suspects, because they're almost always hyper vigilant, and the control is something else. We saw an example. They can track them. They can find out who they're talking to. They can check their mails, the messages. And if they suspect that the person is trying to get away from them, this is one of the most dangerous times. They can really hurt them seriously. So if you are, and I hope that anything we may have said today that could be a trigger for you, please, after the talk, just go and attend to yourself, maybe do some dua, drink some water, get some sun, and just take deep breaths. So if you've recognized in some of that, first of all, try and find out what may be happening, get more informed. Secondly, don't make any sudden moves that changes the pattern of your behavior that is going to alert this person. Remember, you need to be safe. Don't start thinking, "Oh, well, I'm going to stop cooking that meal he's always asking for." No, don't do that. Continue some of that until you can get help, and then see if you can get help. You've just spoken about NZF, and I know that Dr. Nada is available. I'm available, inshallah. And there are many, many resources out there that can help. A lot of things that also reach out for help is they think that there's no culturally appropriate people to go to. If I go talk to a white person, they're going to take me away from my Islam. And sometimes if I talk to someone who's not white, I'm going to feel shame. So help is the most important thing. Try not to focus on that. If you do go to a counselor that is not appropriate for you, try another one and see one or two people that you can trust. Don't tell everybody what you need to do. If you have any little money, save it. If you're able to get your document, keep it. If you're able to look after the kids, don't tell the kids what you're planning, because they can get it out of the kids.
Yes.
Like Brother Ismail said, it may not require you to leave just yet. Maybe the person can get help, but try not to be his therapist. Focus on yourself. Be the savior for him. You focus on yourself and your children. That's the most important thing.
I love, Sister Summayya, how you've emphasized on safety, and also not only safety, but also to prioritize privacy, where privacy is usually one of the first things that goes in an abusive relationship. So try to regain privacy as much as possible about your plans, because as Sister Summayya has elaborated, it is definitely one of the most dangerous times for a woman to be escaping, is when the perpetrator finds out that either she has left or she is about to leave. So it's very important that you prioritize your privacy. Sister Nada, we've got just a few more minutes. I think we've got maybe 6 or 7 minutes. I'm just going to change the question a little bit to what Sister Summayya has mentioned, that if a person feels that they are experiencing domestic violence, what organization or what help is available out there? I've mentioned National Zakat Foundation, but could you give us a little more information? Where can she go? Can she talk to someone on the call, on phone, online?
Thank you so much. I reiterate one thing is safety. Again, because that's number one for the woman, for her kids, and so on and so forth. So if you feel like it's a severe situation, that because the situation can flip in a moment. It can go from less severe, so to high risk. So low risk to high risk. So a person who is a victim survivor or a victim will know when the thing is, and the immediate thing is triple O. Triple O, I can't stress it enough. Triple O. If you feel like you're at immediate risk, call Triple O, or you can call I know that you've put the number there for NZF, but 1800 respect, because that's a number that everybody knows. 1800 respect. Just call that, and they will direct you towards where is it that if you need crisis intervention or so on. And I'm pretty sure that NZF is collaborating with these organizations in terms of being able to, there are safe houses, there are safe spaces that are available. Also finding, I'll reiterate what Sister Summayyath said about finding someone who you can trust. So reach out, don't be silent, because it can be a matter of life and death. So don't be silent, reach out, find someone you can trust, that you can talk to. Your GP, if you feel like I can't call the police, go to your GP. Go to the GP, there's so many different services and organizations available that are mainstream as well as specialized within the different states that you can go to. And it will depend on, obviously, there's a website called it's a research-based website, but they do connect with different organizations. The Australian National Research Organization for Women's Safety, ANROS in short. If you go there, it tells you a lot of the different resources that are available. There are big organizations like Our Watch, for example, in Melbourne, that will tell you what are the different organizations that are available in different areas. There are community organizations that are available. There are women's organizations. So it's just a matter of just Googling it and seeing what are the organizations that have women's, in terms of domestic violence. You'll get hundreds of organizations across Australia. But one thing that I wanted to say to women who may be at risk is, number one is the issue of, obviously, make sure you put your safety plan in place ahead of time. So you've got what are your, like the things that Sister Summayyath said about some finance, a bit of money that if you are able to take the thing, so some garments or whatever, like you have a bag that is there, but you don't put it in an open space. It is in a space that is hidden, so you know that you can just pick that up and run with your documents or whatever, because like you said, they do several attempts before they're able to leave. One of the things about, I would say to people as well is, like, if you're in a severe situation, don't keep the phone, because that's the first thing that may have a tracking device in there. They could be, because you won't know if there's a app that is in there that you're being tracked. So I would say get rid of the phone is the first thing. But you also have the domestic violence protection orders that are available through reaching out to organizations or police or whatever, because there's certain people who it's mandatory for them to report if you come, like, say, for example, your GP or police or certain organizations, counselors and so on. Always reach out to someone. Make sure that you are feeling safe, because we as a community need to be the ones making people feel safe. It is not the responsibility of the victim to feel safe. It is the responsibility of the community to make them feel safe. And I want to congratulate NZF for all of the initiatives that you're taking within the space of the continuum. When you're looking at domestic violence, is the prevention space. So we need to do a lot of work in the prevention space. There is the crisis intervention space, and then there's the recovery space. That's the healing part of stuff. And like, I personally work in the prevention and the recovery space more than the other spaces. And I've worked, alhamdulillah, with the Board of Imams Victoria, as well as NZF, as well as some other organizations in Queensland, in order to be doing these kind of things, and we have to exert effort in interrupting things like male privilege in society. We have to exert effort in not justifying wife abuse. We have to exert effort in those cultures, strongly patriarchal cultures that perpetuate domestic violence, because often it is women who are also have a hand in perpetuating those ideas
forward. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we need to interrupt it. We need to interrupt the ideas of misunderstanding verses like 434 of the Quran or Hadith about, like, if you don't come to me, if the husband is asking for the wife to come and she doesn't, and then they use the Hadith that the angels are cursing you all night. Things like that. We have to stop those kind of narratives, because they really put people at risk. They put the community at risk. They put the next generation at risk. And we really have to do this collectively together as a community coordinated response towards domestic violence. And the healing, in order to move forward, the healing is so important, so that the empowerment is not superficial. There has to be a healing from the trauma, the post-traumatic stress that they go through. So those are some of the things that it's our community responsibility. It is not just that family or that individual, because the Rasul said something. He said that we are like the ummah is like a building. If one of the pillars is lopsided and is falling apart, the whole community falls apart. So in this issue of domestic violence, it is our fard kifaya. It is something that we all have a responsibility to do something in our different spheres, in our circle or power of influence. So that is something that everyone has a responsibility towards it, because Allah will ask us about it.
Sister Nada, I think this is the perfect space for you. This is the perfect sermon for you to finish on, because we're just at the 1 hour mark line. So we might be finishing it there. I'm just going to quickly, before we finish, I'm going to touch back on some of the organizations that you had mentioned. In case if you're feeling that you might be experiencing domestic violence, you can call the National Zakat hotline. You can also call 1-800-RESPECT. You can call also your GP, get in touch with your GP. A maternal health nurse is also a good avenue. Also, Orange Door, if you have got kids involved, they can plug that forward. So we've just hit the 1 hour mark. I think we will be finishing there. Brother Munir, can you finish us off with some words of wisdom? And hopefully we'll end the session there.
Jazakallah khairan to our esteemed guests, Sister Sumaya and Dr. Nada and Mehwish. Just to mention that Sister Mehwish is the NZF champion in the Healing Forward program, and she's working with us in developing and setting the standards. Sister Sumaya and Sister Nada, we will be adding you and your organizations and your expertise to our as a service partners to our program, as you are going to help us lead and work through this, inshallah. So Jazakallah khairan to you for all your expertise and guidance. And for our beloved sisters and for the few brothers who are out there, if you're struggling, you have trouble, as we said, reach out. And if you're afraid to reach out to organizations, reach out to a family member you can trust. Always keep in mind there's the imams. Yeah, we've got lots of bad experience with the imams, but yeah, reach out to the imams.
They are good ones as well.
So, like often people tend to forget the one of the best people to reach out to is actually your parents. So we often, because we're afraid to go to our parents because we're embarrassed. Maybe the father or mother didn't want you to marry that person, and you're afraid. But let me tell you, as a parent, that your parents will never ever, let you go. They will always support you, even if you did go against their wishes, anything. So don't be afraid and reach out to those that truly love you. And we pray for all of those who've tuned in today. Make dua for us for Allah to give us success with this program.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was truly an honor. Jazakallah khairan. Dr. Nada as well, Brother Abu Munir and ZF. Mehwish, amazing conversation with you. Allah Baraka in your effort, because this is very audible indeed. Well done.
And I second that. Jazakallah khair, everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
To this wonderful panel, and we will try to cut it for this session, and hopefully we can have more conversations to come. So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.